We want to know how it starts. So that's why I was in the jungle of Gabon. We were literally in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night.
This is an elephant.
And opening these boxes, it's like opening the Pandora box. Now that I'm thinking, now I would be scared, honestly, after what is happening with COVID-19, because you see pangolins and monkeys and reptiles and birds and civets and bats all together as dead or semi-dead, and you can almost see, you can almost imagine how those viral pandemics begin, and they begin exactly there, right there, in that moment, in that forgotten place of Earth.
Yeah, I was invited
others, like pangolins, for example,
to be on...
Direct from living rooms and home offices around the world, scientists, experts and activists share their stories about a nightmare come true.
Nothing new, it's part of the pattern. The drumbeat continues.
It begins in a wildlife market.
You know, when you visit those markets and you see all those wild animals alive or half alive or just dead on a pile, on each other, like gigantic piles. You have these wet markets all over China and all over Southeast Asia and in Indonesia as well. So it's just fate that decided to that the whole thing would have started in Wuhan.
Speaking from Los Angeles, California, Andrea Crosta, an expert in security technologies, anti-piracy and risk management. He uses his knowledge to fight environmental crime across the globe.
I mean, I follow what is happening on COVID-19 daily, almost hourly, especially because I have friends and family in Italy. So I saw this crisis. I saw the very beginning of this crisis in the West, in Europe, and they still, none of my friends, none of my family, none of the people I'm in contact with got the link between the pandemic and the illegal wildlife trade, to explain the wider public the origin of this pandemic? How did we get to this terrible point?
The trade is a dangerous one to infiltrate. Andrea goes undercover to track supply and trace the culprits.
The lights, yeah. It's a bit weird.
In the middle, you find the real drivers, the real enablers of this whole thing.
All right, that's well, perfect. We're good to go.
And they are sophisticated criminals. They are not trafficking only wildlife, they're heavily into money laundering, some of them heavily into human smuggling, fake passport, fake documents, you name it. I would say that illegal wildlife trade, apart from all the other consequences, in this case, show us clearly that we cannot force nature, and nature will get back to us. And I am hearing people talking about zoonotic diseases in terms of, oh yes, these are the diseases that we get from pigs, from chickens, and from this kind of animals. And I keep saying it's not like that. It's diseases that come from the jungle, diseases that come from exotic animals.
Zoonosis is an animal infection that's transmissible to humans. And most of our infectious diseases fall into this category. This is not a small thing on the fringe of medicine. This is central. 60% of human infectious diseases are zoonotic diseases in the strict sense.
From his home in Bozeman, Montana, David Quammen, science writer, explorer, and author of Spillover, a warning about the next human pandemic. For David, the question was not if, but when it would happen.
Coronaviruses were already near the top of the watch list of dangerous viruses that might come out of animals and cause the next human pandemic.
Make no mistake, this is, though, an emergency in China. But it has not yet become a global health emergency. It may yet become one.
My reaction was, oh no, here we go. And we knew, some of us knew, I knew because I paid attention to the scientists who studied these kinds of things, that this could be really, really bad. This virus, the novel coronavirus, is now one of the most successful viruses on the planet. It's not like we're at war with nature or at war with viruses. Viruses don't have intentions. They do not have evil desires. They simply respond to opportunity. And they have never had a bigger opportunity than when they spread into humans. So the science, the technology, the public health measures, the politics, all of that surrounds this fact as we try and compensate for the fact that we have offered viruses a golden opportunity for evolutionary success. So this has been happening with increasing frequency, these spillovers. Back to at least 1961. 1961, Bolivian hemorrhagic fever, Machupo virus. 1967, Marburg virus. Coming up to Marburg, Germany, in monkeys from Uganda that were being brought in for medical purposes, bringing this virus. 1976, Ebola, the first outbreak in Africa. 1981, our first recognition of HIV, of the AIDS pandemic. Then others in the late 80s, 1992, and the Four Corners area of the U.S., the first outbreak of hantavirus. 1994, Hendra virus, Australia. 1998, Nipah virus, Malaysia, and then Bangladesh. 2003, the SARS coronavirus coming out of China. 2012, MERS, another coronavirus out of the Arabian Peninsula, and then more. 2014, I think it was, Zika virus. So it has been an endless chain, a drumbeat of these spillovers, one of which has led to a global pandemic. It's nothing new. It's part of a pattern. The drumbeat continues.
I haven't slept well since the beginning of February because of all the information I've seen and heard, and unfortunately, it's all come to pass.
From Rancho Cucamonga, California, Tracy McNamara, veterinarian and expert in zoonotic diseases. In the summer of 1999, while head of pathology at the Bronx Zoo, she identified a deadly virus.
Well, it's instant replay. It's deja vu of West Nile virus. Crows were dropping from the sky with neurologic signs. They were dropping into the exhibits at the zoo. And so I aggressively pursued a diagnosis because I wanted to make sure whatever the crows had did not start killing our zoo birds. That coincided with the CDC announcing that people were dying of an unusual encephalitis. Same time, same place, and I thought the temporal and spatial relationships were too striking to ignore.
Could the infection that was killing the birds also be killing New Yorkers? Tracy feared it could be a virus new to veterinary medicine, even new to human medicine.
I took a deep breath, called my family to say goodbye, and went home and wrote my will, because I knew that I had only been wearing a surgical mask and I had been exposed. I called up the CDC and expressed my concerns that there was a possible link between the encephalitic birds and the encephalitic people. But that suggestion was summarily dismissed, and that continued for 3 weeks as human exposures took place at the zoo, as zoo birds and mammals started to die. And finally, in desperation, I realized, getting nowhere with the public health agencies, I reached out to the U.S. military. And when I called them and said, I think it's something new, I think it's the same thing that's killing people, and no one will test my samples, the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute in Infectious Diseases at Fort Detrick said, send us those tissues on dry ice tonight. And that's when everything changed, because it was no longer just a veterinarian telling the CDC, I think there's a problem. It was the big boys in the U.S. military, and that accelerated the investigation greatly.
Within 48 hours, West Nile virus was confirmed. Found in many parts of the world, this was the virus's first documented occurrence in the Americas. By March 2000, there would be 62 confirmed cases with 7 deaths. How it arrived in New York City remains a mystery, but we do know where it comes from. West Nile virus is most commonly spread to people by the bite of an infected mosquito. The virus alternates between the bird reservoir and the mosquito vector. Infected mosquitoes that are fed on infected birds transmit the virus to humans.
We had no idea how the epidemiology of this viral infection would impact the American public, which was completely naive to this virus. that we had a susceptible population, both in terms of animals and people. And that was very scary. The lesson to be learned from West Nile virus was the interrelatedness between humans, animals, and the environment. Now that tigers and lions have tested positive at the Bronx Zoo, which comes as no surprise, this is a zoonotic disease threat, and it stands to reason there are probably more animals that are going to be involved in this disease epidemiology than bats and pangolins.
There's a lot of different pathogens in this world that we are completely unaware of. It's estimated that there may be more than 1.6 million types of viruses.
From Hobart, Tasmania, ecologist and epidemiologist Scott Carver. Scott investigates the emergence of global zoonotic diseases and their transmission across the species barrier.
We're thinking about the risk of human disease coming from animals, particularly wildlife in many cases. But actually, in reality, many diseases from humans can also make it out into wildlife populations. Well, wombats are one of Australia's most iconic animals. They're large, herbivorous marsupial that digs these burrows that they sleep in mostly during the day and come out in the evening and forage on things like grass. They are really impacted by this disease called sarcoptic mange. And this disease was causing this big outbreak, and this wombat population was declining towards essentially local extinction. They lose a lot of hair and they develop this sort of thickened, crusted skin, and ultimately they lose more and more weight and then die from other infections as a consequence of this disease. It's some of the worst animal suffering I have ever seen. And the interesting thing about this disease is that it impacts animals all over the world, including humans. We call it scabies when it infects humans.
Pregnant mites burrow into the skin to lay their eggs. Their life cycle depends on humans who respond by itching. The scabies mite is a big traveller.
And we've used a whole range of research to try and understand where this disease has come from and how wombats came to be infected. And we think that with the expansion of European settlement around many parts of the world, this moved this mite to those areas. At any one time, there's about 100 million people infected with scabies around the world. It also infects over 100 species of animal, and it can readily transmit back and forth among different species.
If a virus passes from its reservoir host and then infects another kind of non-human animal, for instance, an animal that it comes in close contact with in a market, a civet, or a porcupine, or a pangolin in a market in China, or perhaps a pig, and the virus replicates abundantly in that animal and then passes from that to humans, we call that animal an amplifier host because the virus has been amplified in that intermediate host.
Nature is not the enemy. I have heard some people say that nature has become our enemy. Nature is not the enemy. We cannot blame this pandemic on any animal.
In Apex, North Carolina, veterinarian Cheryl Stroud, Executive Director of the One Health Commission. One Health calls for collaboration across all disciplines to connect the health of humans, animals, and the environment around the world.
It's our human behaviors that have pushed the imbalance of ecosystems, the crowding of different species of animals in situations like wet markets, pushing humans in closer contact with animals. It's our human behaviors that have brought this pandemic on us.
Human behaviors like habitat destruction, which led to an outbreak of Nipah virus in 1998.
So in Southeast Asia, there had been a lot of land clearing, more farming going on, and some pig farms were built in a place where some fruit bats could roost in the trees over the pig pens. And the bats defecated and the pigs ate it and got sick because the bats were carrying a virus. It wasn't bothering the bats, but it got into the pigs. And from the pigs then, the people consumed the meat and people were getting sick. It's really a story very similar to what we're living right now. When we realized what had happened, that this Nipah virus had jumped from bats to pigs, very simple remedies were put in place. Pens were removed from places where bats could roost. That was a pretty simple thing once we realized what was happening. And now we have to be paying attention to how we clear land and how close we as humans are coming in contact with the wild animals. They have to have somewhere to go. And when we're stealing basically their homes and encroaching on their space, we're going to see more and more of this kind of spillover.
Bats are also implied in the current coronavirus pandemic.
The virologists who study the evolution of viruses such as this, coronaviruses, have recently published a paper very persuasive on the fact that this virus comes probably directly from bats.
Bats are actually not very different from most other animals. Every animal in this whole world has a lot of viruses, and that includes humans.
Nagpur, India, home to wildlife biologist Rohit Chakravarti. Rohit studies the ecology of India's bats. He's concerned that the world's only flying mammal will be punished for carrying viruses deadly to humans.
In the wake of the COVID-19 outbreak, bats are being demonized all over the world, but bats are not to be blamed for this because bats are extremely important animals. There are two main kinds of bats in the world. There are bats that eat fruits and there are bats that eat insects. So bats that eat fruits pollinate a lot of commercially important food crops, which is why there's a huge amount of economic benefit, there's a huge amount of ecosystem benefits by having bats around us. Bats have an extraordinary immune system, and a lot of factors contribute to the strong immune system. The most important is their power of flight. When bats fly, they put in a lot of force in their flight, and that causes inflammations in the body. But bats do it in a very, very controlled manner. So they repair their cells, but they do not cause any harm to their own body. And just by flying, when you can put your body in a fevered state, it starts resisting viruses. So these are the two main reasons why scientists believe that bats are able to carry viruses but are not affected by them.
Bats are suspects, but SARS-CoV-2 may have been passed to humans via an intermediate host. It's a major scientific puzzle. Because following the outbreak, the Wuhan market was quickly cleared. No evidence remains of the animals sold there.
we realized that the problem of where the virus originated has become a confusing problem for the general public.
In Ann Arbor, Michigan, Shengxin Zhang uses a range of sciences to interpret biological data through a discipline called bioinformatics, which he now employs to identify the coronavirus source.
There are two reasons why it is important to find the animal host of SARS-CoV-2.
COVID-19, the human disease caused by this SARS coronavirus, needs more than quarantine measures before it can be controlled.
Firstly, if we can find the SARS-CoV-2 host now, we can isolate the animal from people and prevent further infection. And second, it can help to reduce the risk of future outbreak when people get too close to wildlife. Our current working hypothesis is that there's a virus from the bat that infects pangolin, and then the pangolin gives the virus to human. We find closely related virus with very similar genetic sequence in pangolin, but what we find is something that is 90% similar. So if we can find something that is 99% similar, then we can say it's the same virus.
And that is enough uncertainty to keep Zhang testing his theory.
We are still searching pangolin and other animals. So unfortunately, I cannot give you a satisfactory answer for now.
I think we have, as a society, we need to be really, really careful to wait and listen for what we find out that's going to be determined by the genetics of the virus. So we need to be taking our time and not pinning the blame on any animal. We need to wait and see exactly what happened.
I certainly feel that the world is not listening to scientists enough. Scientists have been warning about pandemics, but somehow economic benefits, cultural values seem to be putting science at a backseat.
So, like I was saying,
Months before the outbreak, researchers discovered that pangolins carried coronaviruses.
The discovery that pangolin can get infected with symptoms by coronavirus was found in 2019. So that's why pangolin become a highly suspected animal.
In early 2019, Chinese customs authorities intercepted a Malayan pangolin smuggling operation. 21 animals were taken to a wildlife rescue center in southern China, where their conditions soon deteriorated. Members of one of China's leading NGOs were present for the rescue operation. This is their footage.
其中21只穿山甲在我们到达之前就已经死了10多只，我们到达之后有4只活了。但是这4只活的穿山甲呢，流鼻涕、气喘、咳嗽、打呼噜，它们有非常明显的上呼吸道疾病的症状。
From Beijing, Jin Fengzhou lobbies at the highest government level to ensure China's wild animals, environments and biodiversity are protected. He is also first chairperson of the China Pangolin Research Center.
这个穿山甲在猎捕、走私、贩运以及在我们的寄养救护的情况下，它受到了很多的压力，受到了很多的惊吓，受到了很多的不当的环境。毫无疑问的，这些环境都会使得它更容易患病，都会使得它身上的病毒、细菌更容易的溢出到和它接触的人，这都会给我们带来更大的生态风险。
Despite the best efforts of wildlife carers, all of the Malayan pangolins that Jinfeng and his team visited in 2019 died.
他们确实身上存在冠状病毒，但是呢，我们发现的和我们这次人传播的新冠病毒是不一样的。即使他们没有感染，即使他们没有广泛的传播，但是也不能够说明穿山甲身上的病毒和我们今天的病毒以及未来的风险存在着关系，因为呢，病毒都是在不断的变化。
Pangolin scales, made of the same substance found in human hair and fingernails, useless for medicine. For these, we risk deadly viruses and the extinction of a species.
最终研究不是穿山甲带来的这一次疫情，但是穿山甲已经是一个形象，一个符号，它是最被走私最严重的哺乳动物，它是极度濒危，全球极度濒危的野生动物，是我们人类栖。
Well, you shake the tree and things fall out. You bulldoze the tree or cut the tree down, and you can imagine viruses rising like dust as the tree hits the ground. Now, this is not literal, this is metaphorical, but it represents the fact that as we destroy these wild ecosystems, we give these viruses that live in the animals there opportunity to become human viruses. We might swallow them, we might breathe them, but they have the chance of turning into our viruses.
Despite all these, despite this global tragedy and this pandemic, the illegal wildlife trade is still going. You have to imagine a sort of gigantic vacuum cleaner sucking up animals, dead or alive, from around the world. Right now, planet Earth is an open-air buffet. You go there and you put on your plate whatever you like and you go away.
We are very smart, we are very powerful, we are very hungry. It's not just about people who want to eat bats or pangolins. It's a worldwide problem, and we all carry a share of responsibility for it. The decisions that we make, what we eat, what we buy, what we wear, our consumer electronics, how much we travel, all of those things are bringing the viruses that live naturally in wild animals closer to us. If we have a cell phone we're part of this problem, because a cell phone and a laptop computer requires a certain mineral. It's called coltan. Coltan, this mineral, where does that come from? Well, just a few places on the planet, and one of them is the southeastern corner of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where the coltan mines are not far from a highly diverse ecosystem filled with lowland gorillas and monkeys of various sorts and bats. And so by purchasing a cell phone, we ask a miner to go into that forest and mine coltan for us. And what is that miner going to eat? That miner is going to eat wildlife and expose himself or herself to the viruses that they carry. We are driving this whole thing by all of the choices that we make.
One would think that it's a biological problem, but no, it has byproducts in almost every sphere of life.
To think that we can have unlimited economic development on a planet with finite natural resources where human populations are continually growing simply doesn't make any sense.
At home in Bournemouth, England, Jane Goodall, the world's foremost expert on chimpanzees. Jane is a tireless fighter for global conservation and animal welfare, an icon and an inspiration to millions of people.
We've got caught up in a materialistic way of living. We've become greedy. And what we have to do is two things. One, we have to learn in the, we call it the minority world, equals Western world. We have to learn to do with less. Some people, much, much, much less. And we also have to alleviate poverty, because if sudden you could close down all the wildlife markets, then what about the people? Some of them make a living from that. We can't expect them to just sit back and take it. It'll either be driven underground or people will starve. There's said to be approximately 7.2 billion people on the planet now, and we're already using up natural resources in some places faster than nature can replenish them. And in addition to that, in 2050, it's said that there'll be 9.7 billion people. And all the ones in the majority world, in the South, will be wanting to have the same standard of living as us. And why shouldn't they?
You know, down in the rainforest, the Yanomami have a name for us. They call us the termite people, because we're always gobbling up everything like termites. And I think that's a good way to describe our modern civilization.
From his home in Woodstock, Vermont, Captain Paul Watson, marine wildlife conservationist, environmental activist, prepared to risk his own safety to protect Earth's precious ecosystems.
There's going to be more pandemics and much more serious. And the reason for this is that we're indirectly, I guess, causing these problems, because we're destroying habitats and ecosystems and causing diminishment in various species, both plants and animals. And that is setting into motion a lot of consequences. millions and millions of people die every year from diseases either transmitted by parasites or viruses or by bacterium. And we don't really pay too much attention. But the difference between this one is that it's a global pandemic. And as one scientist cynically said, this one affects white people.
And it attacks economies.
The economic cost of these pandemics is unfathomable. I'll give you some examples. In 2003, when we experienced SARS in 37 countries, the economic cost of that, the global impact, was $40 to $54 billion. That's with a B, billion US dollars. Ebola in West Africa in 2013 through 2016 cost us around $53 billion. AIDS, which has cost $563 billion. We lose $570 billion to flu every year. This is not even considering the lives that were lost. These are just the economic losses. This pandemic we're living right now, it will far exceed the numbers that I just mentioned.
It is affecting human economy as well, and it is affecting global politics. So this should be the take-home message from this outbreak.
Well, things aren't going to change until we decide that ecology comes before the economy, and that you can't have an economy without having a healthy ecology.
Animal health, both human and non-human, and the health of our environments will have to be seen as one, or we will continue to risk lives.
The fact that there is really no wildlife disease surveillance or monitoring to speak of is a problem. And it virtually, in putting all of the money into human health surveillance, it basically guarantees that when we're faced with a novel disease threat, a novel zoonotic disease threat, one that's spread between animals and people, it means that we will not detect that viral threat until we have a lot of people in an emergency room or bodies in the morgue.
And so the only way that we can really collaborate is to realize our need for each other and for the exchange of information between the different sectors.
You know, as we see, we cannot all work in boxes. We cannot continue these awful things of not collaborating with each other, not sharing with each other. Do we really want to fight for our planet like this? We are dealing with the most important thing that we have, which is our home, which is our planet, with so many threats, so many issues, so many problems. And yet we do not collaborate, yet we do not share, yet we actually fight with each other.
To make next year the year of prosperity.
Like kids, like children. And this has to change, otherwise we will lose. And by losing, I mean, that will be the end of us.
Change may be coming from where the COVID-19 disease outbreak was first detected.
我们共同的努力才能够解决我们未来面临的更多的危机，包括气候危机和生物多样性危机。
和03年 SARS 之后对比，现在呢发生了很大的变化。03年 SARS 之后呢，所有的禁止立刻从法律层面上就取消了，从实践的层面上也立刻恢复了。全国人大的决定没有也不会在疫情截止的时候来终止，那么法律执法每天都变得越来越严厉。
Jin Feng's organization has been giving the people of China a united voice.
我们这些建议、这些信和函和我们代表公众发出的意见呢，确实在这一项伟大的变革之中发挥了积极的重要的作用。
Their demands are clear.
有几条，第一呢，就是立法的这个基本的指导思想和目的，它不应该只是保护濒危物种，它应该是生物多样性保护，应该是保护所有的野生动物。另外呢，中医和服饰其他领域用途的濒危物种，我们认为应该彻底的停止。同时呢，我们也要求把穿山甲从2级提升为1级。
In China, level 2 protection means the pangolin can be used in traditional medicine and farmed. As a level 1 animal, the sale and use of pangolins and pangolin products would be allowed only under certain strict circumstances, such as scientific research.
Some countries, including China, are changing their laws and are hopefully finally banning the consumption of wild animals. I think it will be very, very important in the next months and years to keep monitoring those markets to be sure that the authorities are doing all they can to shut them down forever. It's a gigantic country, so without the proper effort, it would be very difficult to control whole China. We have a big, big job ahead of us.
Unlike the virus, we're smart. Viral adaptation happens very quickly. Changes in the human genome happen slowly, but changes in human behavior can happen fast. And these are our advantages. This is our chance. We can make changes to our behavior. We can adapt.
We need to get to much more of the sociological issues that are driving the spread of these diseases. And it's not going to be easy. Listen, people still smoke, even though we know smoking kills.
I hope that can actually lead to change that actually sees an active effort to conserve and preserve animals that also we recognize can benefit human health as well.
I hope it will serve to remind people again and again that we need to be more far-sighted in our approach.
We learn how to respect wildlife. That's a very important lesson we have to learn.
I hope that this pandemic has really pushed us not just to a tipping point, but over a tipping point. It's all tied up in planetary health, human health, animal health. It's our way forward. It is truly our ray of hope.
But we have to be honest and recognize that none of us has a crystal ball. No one can predict which animal species might serve as a sentinel for the next pandemic threat.
Actually, I think that that's my personal forecast. The majority of people after this COVID-19 crisis will go back to normal as nothing happened. That's my personal forecast. I really hope to be wrong.
Well, now we're celebrating in big cities clean air. For the first time, some people have breathed pure air. And maybe there'll be enough of them to actually persuade governments and business to do things differently, but it won't happen overnight.
Well, I hope we learn a lesson from this pandemic because the next one's going to be far worse. And we have to really adapt to more of a biocentric perspective on everything, so that we can encourage the other species to survive and live in harmony with us.
这是人类的栖息地之战，也是我们最后的战争。所有的生物都能够栖息。
I just hope and pray and cross my fingers that it will be a wake-up call, that we will learn to live in greater harmony with the natural world.
Seems to me that we'll appreciate those things ever more passionately when this is over. Nature will still be there. There may be a lot of humans who have died, and I hope that we will re-encounter diverse nature with a deeply changed perspective, that if we want those things still to be there, if we want those forests containing gorillas and chimpanzees and monkeys and toucans and sloths and other kinds of wondrous creatures, if we want them to be there, then we have to fundamentally change the rate at which we are increasing our human numbers and increasing our consumption. We have to change that. Otherwise, there will be no birds singing in the trees when we come out of isolation after the next pandemic.